Welcome everyone, this is Zanta. Today's video is on what's new in Revit 2024 and the new site tools that are available. The way I'm going to do this video is I'm going to show you several models, a couple of them coming from existing work and one coming from brand new work. The intention is to show you what does existing site topography look like in the software versus how does it look with the new Toposolid function. We'll also take a look at the different features and new features that are available, and we'll just kind of experiment so you have a better understanding of what you now have, because this is a big deal. Site tools in Revit have been lacking for a very long time, and they haven't been upgraded or changed in a very long time. The last time I remember Autodesk doing something about Revit was when they bought Eagle Point software. Site Designer, I think is what it was called. But nothing really, as far as I can tell, came of it heavily. So let's go ahead and take a look. Here I'm in Revit 2024, and this model that you see here is an existing Revit model of existing topography created back in 2020 actually. And if we select the topography, it tells you it's a topography. It also gives you a contextual tab to generate a new Toposolid. If you create a new Toposolid from this, the existing topo surface will remain. It's good advice to kind of keep it there for a while just to verify that your Toposolid is good before you decide to delete that topo surface. And if we take a look at this object, and let's go ahead and isolate the category just so you can see what we're dealing with. I've got my topo surface here, and the reason you see all of this is because I have a building pad for the building, and this topo surface is made up of multiple surfaces. Let's switch over to the working 3D view so you can get a better handle on what's going on. So again, let me select my topo surface. Let's isolate the category, and let's switch this to realistic. So as you can see, this is actually made up of several pieces of topo surface. And you'll also notice that you don't really have any thickness when it comes to topo surface. Obviously, you can select the points and modify the points to adjust them for height. But this is kind of in essence what you get. Now I want to close this file. And we're going to take a look at that topo surface having been converted to a Toposolid. So now if I select this and we isolate the category, we can see that they actually have a level of thickness, if you will. So if I select that topo surface and I go over to my type selector, you'll notice that a Toposolid is very, very similar to a system family now. It's kind of like a floor system family, but also having site component capability. If I go in and I select edit type, it'll bring up the dialog box, and as usual, you can click edit under structure. And now you can start building up the layers that make up that specific Toposolid. This is pretty cool, especially with it having a variable function. So that way it looks like it's solid, and when you do have different parts of the site being thinner versus thicker, it takes into account that data. If we select that topo surface and go to the type properties, we can see they've also updated it to have contour display in here now, not part of the old ribbon with the panel and the little arrow in the lower right corner. And so now the contour displays are over here. And as you can see, this one is also still made up of multiple pieces, and it just gives you a better understanding of what you have to work with. Now, when you are working in 24 Revit, they no longer have a building pad, and they no longer have merge surfaces and things like that, because that command is built upon topography. Since we don't have that capability, they're changing it and they give you different tools. Let's take a look at another model. This one is the model, and as you can see, let me again isolate the category. And you can see these are all topo surfaces, and you kind of do your best to make it look as best as you can. And if I were to take a look at it after playing with it in 2024 Revit, let's go ahead and isolate these. You can now see that there's, thickness and whatnot. Okay. So it's pretty cool that you can start building your site a bit more realistic this way. Let's take a look now at the actual commands and the different tools and the function. Here I have a Revit model created from the default brand new template that comes shipped with the software. And just for you, those of you who aren't aware, when you go to start a new project in 2024 Revit, they now have imperial and metric multidiscipline template files available. You can click browse and go back to the default commercial if that's what you need as well. Okay. I just use the brand new one just to test and see what's going on. And you can see over here in the project browser that you've got coordination, you've got electrical, mechanical, plumbing, view categorizations and things like that. Going back to this model, I built this pretty straightforward in the sense of building the topography and then looking at voids, because you can now use voids to cut your Toposolid, and you can also use different objects that are system families like walls, floors, and whatnot. The points that you work with the topography back in the old days was relative to 0, 0, 0. Now your points for your toposolids are relative to everything, really, honestly. It could be relative to internal origin point, to survey point, to project pace point, or internal origin. If I were to select this topo surface, you'll also you see in the contextual tab of the ribbon under shape editing, the points are not visible by default, but if you put the check mark here, they will be visible. Depending on what you're dealing with, if I click modify sub-elements, I can see those points. This is a very, very flat, simple site. But if I were to go back to the other file, let's go back to, say, this one, you'll be able to see those points a lot easier, especially since this other model has a fairly complex. So again, if I select it, turn on preview points, you can start to see those points, see? And if I were to click modify sub-elements, I still get my dashed lines, I still get my points, I can still select them and adjust their heights using elevation and contextual tab and contextual panel functionality. Okay. Now let's go back to this one. When you are in the massing and site tab, take a look at the new panel. It's a lot more streamlined. So you've lost some commands and it's not going to look what you're used to. So you have lost the topo surface command and it's replaced with Toposolid. You still have site component, you still have parking component, you have lost building pad command, you have lost split surface and merge surface because the split tool now functions on your Toposolid. And also you've lost subregion because when you're working with toposolids and I select a toposolid, I can actually subdivide it into another topo surface. So for example, over here, this toposolid is a subdivision of this one. And all it is just one that I created that's concrete. You have to have, it will always default to a 1 foot difference in height, but then you can adjust it to change that height. It cannot be the exact same height. It has to have an absolute minimal distance of 2 millimeters, if I understand correctly. So you'll have to kind of play with those settings to get it to look exactly the way you want. So in a situation like this where you've got a car going down a ramp and the car going up the ramp, you know, a 1/4 inch difference is not going to kill anybody, right? Um, it's a tripping hazard, but for vehicle driving, it's fine. If I were to turn on my section box tool, kind of go through this, you can see and hear that the topo surface now, which is now a topo solid, is cuttable. So I've taken these vertical walls and I've used them to cut the geometry. I've also used void geometry content. So I created in-place family voids and I used the cut geometry command to cut the topo solid using those void geometries. So I can get it to look the way I want it to look, which is basically the car being able to come down and going across and through. Site component is still the standard site component command. You can add different site-based content to it. The railings here are being hosted by the walls. So if I wanted to say put in a railing, let's go to level 2, and let's just put some railing over here on the topography. And we'll use the same one that we used earlier. And let's just sketch it right here. If we take a look at it, it initially looks like it's on the Toposolid, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's hosted by the Toposolid. So if I were to take this Toposolid and let's just move it up by, I don't know, 5 feet, does the railing go with it? No, it doesn't. It stays static. So what you have to always make sure you do when you're dealing with railings, especially with topo surfaces, is select the railing, click pick new host, and then touch the topo solid. So now that it is hosted by it, if I were to move this up by 5 feet, the railing moves with it. See that? So just little things like that you want to be aware of, especially when you're dealing with the topo solid and trying to have families and other objects that are hosted. So different types of objects that you can use to cut the topo solid are ceilings, floors, floor slab edges, roofs, fascia, gutter, roof soffits, structural foundations, walls, wall sweeps, and mass voids. Okay, so there's a lot of new category of content that you can use to cut your topo solid. The only thing that I was researching is that you have to be very careful now with the topo solid command because the information that's extracted in regards to the net cut fill and the fill and the cut values are not 100% accurate anymore. It's something you might want to take a look at. There's a little thing that I read. Most of us who are crazy Revit people go to revitpeer.com and they have a blog and they have a blog post. The blog post on the topo surface, the second link, strictly talks about the new toposolid command, and their 10th item that they list talks about this information, so you might want to read up on it. This is a really big deal for those of us who've been in Revit for a long time. This is a very good welcome feature to the new site tools. It makes your work a little easier to build the content. It makes it look a lot more realistic. And, you know, just kind of holistically is a better approach to trying to build your topography better. Ultimately, the best way to build your topography is to work with your civil engineer. Now, if you do have a 3D CAD file, you can still bring it in and you can still create a toposolid from an imported 3D CAD file that's linked in. So the original method of creating a topo surface, whether you're drawing it by sketch or by selecting an imported object, a CAD file, or by specifying points using a comma separated value file, they all still apply with a toposolid command. So let's do one last thing. If I go to top view, and we'll just kind of do it over here. Massing and site, toposolid, see, create from sketch. will create from import. So if I click create from sketch, it's going to double check what work plane. The last time I worked on this, I was working on the wall. So let me set the work plane. Let's make it level 2 is fine. And now when we go to create my from sketch Toposolid, again, you can have all your sketching tools. You can use pick wall, draw a line, any of these tools in here, and you can just draw your surface. Again, same kind of rule of thumb when it comes to sketch mode. Everything has to be a nice clean loop, no gaps, no overlaps, no straight lines anywhere. And once you've done that, you've created a very basic Toposolid. Now, if we go into the type properties of the Toposolid, again, like I said earlier, you can dig in and you can change all the different layer makeups and the heights and things like that. To give this some kind of variable height, you can click modify subelements and you can go ahead and start adjusting these values. Other than that, those are all the new tools in the massing and site tab of the ribbon for Revit 2024. It's a really, really good push forward in that aspect of using the software. Try as much as you can to study it and learn it because it will help you out down the road. Okay? Thank you very much for watching.